Okay, so I think we can agree that The Lottery is a creepy story, right? Some people try to call it a horror story. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think it's creepy, right? And we don't see it coming. At least when I read it, I didn't see it coming. And I think the creepiness of this is accomplished a lot of times through the use of irony. So I'm going to talk about a few different points of irony as used in the story. And we can start talking about irony in the story before we even get to the body of the text, right? What is the story called? Well, it's called The Lottery. When you hear the word lottery, what's your expectation? You probably think of a good thing, lots of money, comfort, wealth, those sorts of things, right? Is that the case in this story? Well, no, it's not. The lottery comes to mean something very different by the end of the story. So here's our first point of irony. She's using the word and the title, the lottery, to subvert our expectations. When we see the lottery, we think we're going to go off in this direction, but the whole time she's pulling us off in this direction, okay? We think we're headed towards happiness, but really we're headed toward, I don't know, destruction, right? So that's one point of irony. I think a second point of irony in the story, and it happens the entire time, is just the way in which the story is told. If we think of this as a horror story or as a creepy story, how are most horror stories told? Well, they're usually over the top, right? And they're set in this dark and gloomy place. You're in a house, there are no lights, there are weird sounds all around you. And that feeling of suspense begins right away, and the setting contributes to that. But this seems set in a different way, and it seems to be in a very peaceful place. The prose doesn't give you very many hints of what's going on. And so I think that's a little bit ironic. We wouldn't expect a terrible thing like this to be happening in such a beautiful, idyllic place. Here's the first sentence of the story. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. Well, that seems like a beautiful place to be, right? And we're sort of sold that this is a beautiful place to be. But then this terrible thing happens in the story. So I feel like that's another point of irony, because there's this tension between the place and what happens in the place. And the way the story is told, which is pretty chill, right? It's not overly dramatic. This would actually make a terrible Hollywood movie, right? Because there are no special effects or anything, no big explosions. You wouldn't have this really dramatic score. The music behind the scenes wouldn't be very dramatic. So we proceed pretty slowly, and so there's this tension between the setting and the way the story is told and what's really going on. Okay, so that's another piece of irony. And one thing that I find to be the most creepy are the stones that the people use to kill, if they kill, Tessie Hutchinson. What kind of stones are the boys gathering on the first page of the story? Let's think about this. What is the purpose of the stones? To kill the person who's chosen in the lottery, right? But what types of stones do they use? What are they gathering in the town square? Let me see here. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. And I think that's the creepiest thing of the whole story, is that if the intention is to kill someone, wouldn't you want to make it as quick and painless as possible? I guess you would. But what are they doing in this story? They're choosing the smoothest, roundest stones, which in a way is going to prolong the agony, right? I feel like that's the most horrifying detail of the whole story. And you don't pick up on it right away, and it might be a detail that's lost to you on the first read, but as you come back and read it again, when you know what's happening and you're like, oh my god, they're using the smoothest, roundest stones, and I feel like that's this really cruel way. So instead of killing her quickly, they sort of have this intention of killing her very slowly. Maybe with the exception of the woman who picks up the rock with two hands and she can't walk very fast because it's so big. So maybe her intention's a little bit different, but there's these smooth round stones I find to be very creepy. And it's just a way of prolonging the death of the person that's chosen. So there are a couple instances of irony as used in The Lottery.